when it comes to model training, there's no question that Nvidia holds the crown there. But when it comes to inferencing, they hold less than half of that business there. 40% of their GPUs go towards this specific part of training. How would you say that risk kind of stacks up in comparison to the rest of what you're seeing going into Nvidia?
Well, it's one of the really big risks, and it's kind of down from the headline, as you point out. This is a great point that not all chips are used in the same way, and they're not used in the same proportion. So what we're talking about here in building the model versus inference is there's just different chips made. You know, you get the model and then you ask the model questions. So two different sets of thinking chips, right? So here's the big problem, I think. In the past, OpenAI specifically has just been throwing more and more horsepower at building its big model. And it looks like that's not working because they're not being able to produce the new big models on a timeline that they publish. So there's something wrong there. And so here's the problem that I think a lot of thinking investors have with this company is it really going to need all of those chips to build these big models? I'm guessing no. I mean, nobody really wants to have like server farms covering the earth. Nobody wants that expense, and it looked like that was necessary, but maybe there will be new ways to be able to build the big models without using, every last acre of farmland for a data center, and thus, buying every chip that Nvidia could make.
I do think, though, Jensen Huang thus far has done a good job at fighting back against that nervousness in the market that we were sort of peaking out inefficiency levels from large language models. I think he's pushed back against the fact that DeepSeek is an issue because he says they are needed for inference. So what more do you need to hear from him? Is it actual data that proves Blackwell is in users' hands that ultimately because analysts haven't changed their perspective on how big a revenue we're going to see for Nvidia come 2026?
Sure. Well, 2026 is an interesting year, but almost irrelevant, right? Because everybody in the world that uses these things that are a public company have already told us they're going to spend, anywhere from, 60 to $80 billion. That's Microsoft and, all the big Magnificent Seven users of this. So that's not really the problem. What we're doing is we're looking at 27, 28, 29, 30 and saying, is the company going to be able to double like it has in the past? Like, that's the most amazing thing. And in a very short time period, it went from having 20 billion in sales to 60 billion. That's incredible. And you never see that. And it got rewarded for that in its valuation. But looking forward, is that really the case? And I'm betting the answer is no, that's not the case, that they have the opportunity to double again.
To your point, Kim, demand isn't going anywhere. We heard from the big tech giants that they are continuing, affirming their CapEx plans, even boosting some of them. So the spigot isn't going to be turned off to Nvidia anytime soon. But can the company handle that capacity? Do you have any concerns about whether it can actually supply this demand?
Sure. Well, I have two concerns. Can it supply the demand? And that's really TSMC, and they're doing a good job, right? But it takes time to build, to bring these extremely advanced fab lines online. And they're just incredibly complicated. But secondly, are the chips working? In the beginning of the releases, we heard about some overheating problems. And this is legendary in the world of chips. This is not a new thing. Intel had this problem, AMD, everybody goes through this discovery whenever you're creating the hot, fast new chip that you go, uh-oh, I forgot this little area here and it's creating a problem. So all of these are kind of little worries that people have. And yes, Jensen Huang will address these without a doubt. But, we're talking about, this isn't software, this is hardware. This stuff just has to work. It just does.
So where does this leave the company from a hardware perspective when you do have chips exports, this tit for tat between Beijing and Washington?
Well, here's a crazy idea. As I was listening to the intro, what if China starts building data centers over here? Would we sell the chips to them? Where would be the problem? So there are many ways you can get around this. Let's see how they fight. I think everybody's thinking out of the box again.
Well, we know the president calls himself a deal maker. We'll see whether he'd ever apply himself to that sort of a deal with China building here. But certainly he's pushed TSMC and Taiwanese chip makers to want to build more manufacturing here in the United States. What's interesting is about, where you put your money. Your money is where your mouth is. Is it aligned with Nvidia? You seem to like other chip makers more at this valuation level, Kim.
I do, because, I think they're an incredible company, but they really only have 4 product lines. And 2 we don't care about anymore, game machines and, graphics chips for PCs. We don't care. The 3rd one is crypto. We kind of care about this, but the one that's been driving Nvidia is certainly AI. And my bet is that they are not going to be able to, in a relatively short period of time, like let's say 18 months, double their revenues again. That is what brought them here, is that huge demand and their ability to create product that met that demand. I'm unsure of the demand portion, again, not through 26 but the doubling of that demand, the ability to meet it, and really whether all of this can continue to work. It's a really narrow path that they're walking, and bad things can happen. And so I like to look at other areas, especially memory.
Yeah.
We are just creating so much data. It has to live somewhere. And I think that's pretty much an overlooked area.
Kim Forrest, great to have you on Bokeh Capital
Thank
Partners.
you.
Now coming up, Amazon says it is investing more than any other company in, you guessed it, AI. We'll find out what this means for the company's devices and other investments after the break. Alexa Plus, here we come. This is Bloomberg Technology.